बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। अस्सलाम वालेकुम स्टूडेंट्स, क्या आप मेरी आवाज़ सुन सकते हैं? प्लीज़ रिस्पॉन्ड ऑन चैट। अच्छा, हबीबा और साइड बाय साइड और जो स्टूडेंट्स हैं ऐसे जिन्होंने अभी तक अपने नाम के साथ रोल नंबर एसोसिएट नहीं किया हुआ, अपने आप को रीनेम करें। ठीक है, हिबा खान और फायजा महमूद, ठीक है, हबीबा, ये तमाम स्टूडेंट्स अपने आप को, अपने नाम को रीनेम करें। मैं यहाँ पे इनेबल उनको कर रहा हूँ, रीनेम का ऑप्शन उनको दे रहा हूँ और रीनेम अपने आप को कर सकते हैं। ठीक है, जब आप अपने आप को रोल नंबर वाइज रीनेम कर लेंगे नाम के साथ, तो उसमें ये आसानी हो जाएगी, एक ही नज़र में नज़र आ जाएगा कि आप मॉर्निंग के हैं और किस ग्रुप के हैं। तो मेरे लिए कंट्रोलिंग में आसानी हो जाएगी। अब्दुल सत्तार बाबर, सही है, आपका 107 नज़र आ रहा है मुझे, लेकिन बाकी स्टूडेंट्स जो इनका मैंने नाम लिया है, हबीबा अयूब का भी नज़र नहीं आ रहा मुझे, हिबा खान का मुझे नज़र नहीं आ रहा रोल नंबर। तो ये सब जो है ना, ज़रा सा अपने रोल नंबर को इनेबल कर लें अपने जूम के जो नेम है, जिस नेम से एंटर हो रहे हैं जूम चैट रूम में, वहाँ पे इसको इनेबल करें। और सीआर जो है वो ये हिबा खान, आप सीआर हैं या कोई और? ये हिबा खान है। ओके बेटे, सही है, हिबा ने अपना रीनेम कर लिया, सही है बेटे। तो आपने कर लिया तो आप फिर बाकी लोगों को भी जो है वो मैसेज करें और उनको बताएं कि उनको अपने रोल नंबर को नाम के साथ इनकॉर्पोरेट करना है। इस तरह से हमें जो ऐसे स्टूडेंट जो कि बिलोंग नहीं करते आपकी क्लास से, आपके ग्रुप से, अगर वो ज्वाइन करेंगे तो उनको आइडेंटिफाई करना आसान और रिमूव करना आसान हो जाएगा। ठीक है, तो स्टूडेंट एक चीज़ और कि जैसे अगर मैं बीच में लेक्चर पे ध्यान देने की वजह से मिस कर जाऊं, स्टूडेंट्स जो हैं इन नहीं हो पाए, तो काइंडली मुझे बता दीजिएगा ताकि मैं उनको इन कर लूं। चैट विंडो मैंने सामने खुली हुई है, तो उस पर आप बता दीजिएगा। ठीक, हम अपनी क्लास का आगाज करते हैं। अच्छा, अ, ये जो हमारी स्लाइड अभी आपको शो हो रही है, ये हम वहाँ जाएंगे जहाँ पे हमने लास्ट टाइम अपनी स्लाइड ब्रेक की थी। और ये मेरा ख्याल है अब जो स्क्रीन आपके पास आ रही है, ये वो स्लाइड है जिसपे हमने लास्ट एंड किया था अपने लेक्चर को। एम आई राइट? प्लीज रिस्पॉन्ड इन चैट। ओके, सो हम नेक्स्ट स्लाइड के ऊपर जाते हैं। इस स्लाइड में ये जो हमने कही थी, द लास्ट थिंग दैट वी हैव डिस्कस इन दैट स्लाइड इज द प्रेजेंस ऑफ द pleural membrane that comprised of two parts. One is known as the parietal pleura and other is known as the visceral pleura. Okay, uh, parietal pleura is having an attachment with the internal wall of the lung of the thoracic cavity, and visceral pleura is associated with the outer surface of the lung. Between them there is a cavity, fine cavity is there, that is known as the pleural cavity. Inside that pleural cavity there is some quantity of fluid that is known as the pleural fluid. So what is the use of that? The most important use of that parietal and visceral pleura is parietal pleura attached to that thoracic wall internal lining and visceral pleura attached to the lungs. So when the thoracic cavity size increases during inhalation, the lung size also increases with that. And when the thoracic cavity size decreases in expiration, similarly, the size of the lungs will decrease during that expiration process. So during inspiration, size of the thoracic cavity increase, lung size increase. With expiration, size of the thoracic cavity decreased and lungs volume is also going to be decreased. So what is the use of it? See, mechanics of the breathing, that is through which how the breathing and inlet and outlet of the air, internal intake of the air and the expiration of the air is being going on. It is going on through the concentration gradient, and concentration gradient is a flow of molecules from their higher concentration towards their lower concentration. Simple diffusion. So atmospheric pressure is 760 millimeter of mercury. Atmospheric pressure 760 millimeter of mercury, 1 atmosphere. At rest position, the internal uh, pressure, that is known as the intrapulmonary pressure or intra alveolar pressure, is same as the atmospheric pressure, that is 760 millimeter of mercury. Okay, but when the inspiration is going on with the contraction of external intercostal muscles and with the contraction of diaphragm, the rib cage is pulled upward, outward, and the diaphragm goes downward, resulting in increase in the thoracic cavity size. As lungs are enclosed and attached within the thoracic cavity, so size of the lungs also going to increase. Now, there is a physical law over there that is known as a Boyle's law. Boyle's law states that volume and pressure are inversely proportional. Volume and pressure are inversely proportional. More the volume, lesser will be the pressure, and vice versa. So, what happened when the lung volume increases? The pressure within the lungs, that is intrapulmonary pressure or intra-alveolar pressure, it is going to decrease, and it is going to decrease from 760 millimeter of mercury towards 758 millimeter. So 2 mm of mercury lesser pressure inside the lungs, and that will increase the flow of the air from the atmosphere into the lungs. This is inhalation. Then exhalation, the contraction stops, diaphragm contraction stops, and the respiratory muscles contraction stops, external intercostal muscles especially. So what happened? The rib cage size decreases. Rib cage moves downward, inward, and the diaphragm reattain its dome shaped position. All those phenomena decreases the thoracic cavity size. So lungs are also enclosed in that. So lung size also going to be decreased. Decreased lung size or volume, increase will be the pressure. Now the pressure within the lungs increases from that 758 to 759, 760, 761, 762 millimeter of mercury. 762 millimeter of mercury is the pressure within the lungs right now at exhalation. Again, more pressure than the outside environment or atmospheric pressure. So air will move from the lungs into the atmosphere. In inhalation, it was pressure was down, so the air moves from the atmosphere within the lungs, and now vice versa, the lungs having increased pressure, so the air moves out from the lungs into the atmosphere through the expiration process. So this enables lungs to do the job, the mechanics of respiration. Okay, going to the next slide. Lungs separated from each other by the heart and the other structures in the mediastinum. Major structure in the mediastinum, that is a space between the two lungs, are heart and large vessels in aorta and the large veins like vena cavas. Okay, they are placed are in the mediastinum space. Then each lung is enclosed by a double layered pleural membrane. Parietal pleura lines walls of thoracic cavity, and visceral pleura covers the lungs outer surface themselves. So it means that each lung is separately enclosed by that pleural membrane, and each lung can function independently. It is also important that each lung can function independently in case of some trauma, accident, gunshot, or stabbing. If one lung collapses and fails, other lung will continue work and be a lifesaver. The thoracic cavity in which the pleural fluid is the pleural cavity in which the pleural fluid is there. It is very important. Pleural cavity is the space between the layers, and that space is filled with few mLs of a fluid that is known as a pleural fluid. And the function of that pleural fluid is to reduce the friction, and it overcomes the collapsing problem by producing the surface tension. because of it because of it, when the expansion of the thoracic cavity is there, with that expansion lungs also expand. When there is decrease in the size of the lung volume during expiration, it is also being done by that fluid available in the pleural cavity. And why that fluid? Consider an example of two glass slides. Take one glass slide, put few drops of water in the top of it, and place another glass slide on it. Now you will see, because of the surface tension present, what happened, that the those slides stuck together. If you want to get them separate, you can do it with some difficulty because there's a binding force there, and that binding force is the hydrogen bonding of the water. But if you want to slide those over one another, sliding is very easy because the water is in between, so there is no friction or very lesser friction is there. So that decreased friction is required in order to have a good expansion and retraction of the lungs in the thoracic cavity during the process of inspiration and expiration. Then we have a cardiac notch over there. That cardiac notch that houses the heart, and because of that positioning of heart at the cardiac notch position, the left lung is some 10 to 15% smaller than the right lung. Okay. Next slide. Here you can see original picture of the cadaver lung, and you can see this is the sternum, and this is the left lung, this is the right lung, this is the aorta. Okay, the organs that are present in the mediastinum, the aorta, the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary vein, and the heart. You can see the esophagus over there, and this is the visceral pleura being showed. Visceral pleura and parietal pleura, and between them is a cavity that is known as a pleural cavity. Okay. Going to the next slide. See, I want to expand that slide for you because this is a very small one. So I'm expanding that slides for you. See, in this, you can see the association of the lungs within the rib cage. This is the first rib, and the top of the lung is known as the apex. Okay, and this is the left, this is the right trunk being enclosed. Lungs are very delicate and hollow and spongy structure, so they are being protected. Lungs and heart are being protected by the bony cage, and that bony cage is known as the rib cage. Okay, and then lungs are associated in that way that when that bony cage or the ribs associated with the thoracic cavity, when they expand, the lungs also expand, and when they retract, the lungs also retract. This is the base of the lungs shown over here, base of the lungs shown over here, and this is a pleural cavity, and the pleura is here. Now you can see the positioning of the right as well as the left lung. Both lungs got a oblique fissure. With the help of that oblique fissure, we have two lobes in the left lung. Okay, the first one is a superior and other is inferior. This is also present into the right lung, which is 10% more having size, more sized in comparison with the left one. But it has also got a horizontal fissure, and with that horizontal fissure we have three lobes over here. First is superior, last one is inferior, and the middle one is the middle lobe. You can see the cardiac notch over there. Okay, and this is the mediastinum space. You can see the presence of the vena cava and presence of the pulmonary vessels, the large arteries over there. Okay, the lymphatic vessels. So this is hilus structure shown. Next slide. Lobes, anatomy of the lungs, basic structure. There we have different lobes in each lung divided by one or two fissure. The right with the two fissure, left with the one fissure. and three lobes for the right and two lobes for the left. Each lobe receives its own secondary lobar bronchus branch, and that will further divided into tertiary or segmental bronchi. These lobes are the secondary one, lobar, but after converting it or subdividing into tertiary, it will convert into lobular. So these lobular or lobules are wrapped in elastic connective tissues, and they contain lymphatic vessels. This is a unit. This is a unit. Now we are talking about a unit, and that unit of lobules contain a lymphatic vessel, an arteriole, a venule, and a branch from the terminal bronchiole. And sooner that terminal bronchiole will convert further into respiratory bronchiole. Terminal bronchiole is the last part of the conducting division. Respiratory bronchiole is the first part of the respiratory division of respiratory system. Terminal bronchioles branch into respiratory bronchiole, and which divided into then alveolar duct, alveolar sac, and the functional unit of the lung, that is alveolus. Alveolus is not composed of single cell. Alveolus is not composed of a single cell. Rather, different cells, pneumocytes or alveolar cells stuck together, joined together to form a functional unit that is known as the alveolus. Okay, so there are different orders of the branching, about 20 orders of the branching is there, but that is the structural detail, so I'm not going further into that. Next slide. Here you can see microscopic structure, microscopic anatomy of the alveolus or lung portions. So you can see this is a lung diagram being enlarged and shown over here. This is the drawn picture drawn by an artist, and this is our original photo micrograph. Okay, so first explain you the drawn picture. See, this is terminal bronchiole, and that terminal bronchiole is then converted into respiratory bronchiole upon further division. And see, respiratory bronchiole is having lesser diameter and more simpler. Terminal bronchiole is being supplied with the help of vessels, pulmonary arteriole, see over here, pulmonary arteriole over here, pulmonary venule over here, and lymphatic vessel, green lymphatic vessels are also there, that green vessels, small vessels. See, these are actually wrapping that bronchiole, and then terminal bronchiole finally enters into the respiratory bronchiole, and now we have the respiratory division. The further subdivisions are, you can see, this is the duct, alveolar duct, and this is the sac-like structure. It's composed of multiple alveolus, and that is known as alveolar sac. This is known as the alveolar sac. Here is a diagram in which the internal structure of the alveolar sac. Here, internal structures have been shown over here in that region where my cursor is now moving, and that you can see the C shape or cup shape structure is a single alveolus. The combination of the alveolus in a form of sac is known as the alveolar sac. The alveolar sac, they actually share a common duct through which the air gets in and out. This is known as the alveolar duct. You can see alveolar duct over here. You can see alveolar duct over here. Now, this is the alveolus. Acha, I have entered Mahajabin Hiba. I have entered. See, this is the elastic connective tissue. Elastic connective tissue. This is the pulmonary capillary. Visceral pleura, you can see this is the visceral pleura and the alveoli. And similar structures are also being shown in the original photomicrograph. You can see this is the terminal bronchiole. This is the respiratory bronchiole. Here we have seen the blood vessel, and now this delicate C-shaped structures are alveolus. When they are arranged in form of a second, generally they are arranged in form of two or more alveolus joined together, fused together, combined together to form a sac. That is the alveolar sac. You can see the alveolar sac over here, alveolar sac, single alveolus over here and over here, alveolar duct, the channel, that duct that is being shared by the alveolus for the exchange of the air is known as the alveolar duct. Now going back to the next slide. Alveoli are the cup shape or C shape out pouching, and when two or more alveoli shared together is a common opening that is known as the alveolar sac. And then they joined with the same passage or duct is known as the alveolar duct. Uh, Alveolus are containing two types of epithelial cell, but the type 1 cell makes the boundary of the or is basic structure of the alveolus, and these are known as type 1 pneumocytes, or type 1 cells. Type 1 alveolar cells forms nearly continuous lining, more numerous than type 2, and main site of the gas exchange is the type 1 pneumocyte. Abdullah Khan is asking that alveolar duct ka function. The function of the alveolar duct is the passage of the air for the ventilation. Okay, and different sets of alveoli share the same duct. Okay, so you can see over here, type 1 alveolar cells are those which are forming the structure, basic structure of the alveolus, whereas the type 2 alveolar cells or septal cells, they are arranged in the form of cells that contain the microvilli and that secrete the alveolar fluid, and that alveolar fluid is a surfactant, a surface active agent, and surface active agent's main function is to reduce the surface tension. So first of all, pleural fluid was there in order to increase the surface tension, and here the surfactant is there in order to decrease the surface tension. So what is the thing, why we need surface tension and why we do not need excessive surface tension? We need surface tension in order to prevent the collapse of the lungs when there is lower air pressure during expiration. So if the lungs collapse, more energy will be required to re-inflate the lungs from zero. Okay. But if the surface tension is more and more, then the expansion of the lungs required more and more energy. Consider examples of two balloons. One balloon is thick walled and other balloon is thin walled. When you try to inflate the thick walled balloon, you have to put more energy and more air pressure in it. But if you want to inflate thin wall balloon, it will be very easy because of the lesser elasticity and lesser tension. Okay, so that is a explanation that if the surface tension is more, then the expansion of the lungs will require more and more energy. Labored breathing, difficulty in breathing. Okay, so adequate amount of the surfactant is required for easy breathing for those children that are born prematurely. They have lacking in the quantities of the surfactant. The surfactant is not present in the adequate quantities. So what happened, that they require assisted respiration or assisted breathing, and they require incubation as well as the ventilation. The need of the ventilation is there. The lungs are not mature. What is the maturity of the lungs? Adequate amount of the surfactant must be there, because the first respiratory movement of the body after birth is the cry of the baby. The cry of the baby is the deliberate act of the baby to fill the lungs for the first time with air. Lungs are not functional in the gestation period. It soon get functional when the birth is there after parturition. So first filling of that lungs with the air is the help of the cry of the baby. So the cry of the baby is very much important, and after that lungs never collapse until and unless there is a very drastic event or accident or trauma or stabbing. In the pleural cavity, if air traps in the pleural cavity, if blood traps, for example in case of gunshot and stabbing, this will result in the collapse of that lung, because now the lungs cannot withstand with that expansion and retraction process. So this is known as the pneumothorax or hemothorax. Hemothorax is the presence of the blood in the pleural cavity, and pneumothorax is the presence of the air in the thoracic cavity, then the pleural cavity. Sorry. Okay. So next slide. Respiratory membrane. What is that respiratory membrane? Is respiratory membrane is actually a membrane that comprised of the walls of alveolus and the walls of the capillaries. Now we have four basic structures in that. First is the alveolar wall that constitutes of type 1 and type 2 cells. And other is the capillary wall, that is a capillary basement membrane and capillary endothelial cells. So these majorly composed of a single layer of squamous epithelium or flattened cells, very thin, and so much thin that the whole respiratory membrane thickness that contains the alveolar wall, type 1, type 2 alveolar cell, epithelial basement membrane, capillary basement membrane, and capillary endothelium. The whole diameter is only zero point 0.5 micron. So that very delicate respiratory membrane allows easy and rapid diffusion of the gases through it. That is, from the atmosphere oxygen get in through that, and through that also the carbon dioxide fuses from the body into that alveolus fluid, from the capillaries into the alveolus area where the air is there. Okay, lungs receive blood for their function from the pulmonary artery that contain deoxygenated blood, whereas the brachial artery that contain the oxygenated blood. Okay, pulmonary artery is the only artery of the body that contain the deoxygenated blood, whereas the bronchial arteries contain the oxygenated blood. Okay, to perfuse. So what happened? Actually, the pulmonary artery carries the blood that needs the oxygenation, and that oxygenation will be there in the alveolus, and after that, and for the functioning of the own functioning of the lungs, the bronchial arteries supply oxygenated blood to perfuse the muscles and walls of the bronchi and the bronchioles to give them strength, to give them material for cellular respiration, that is the oxygen as well as the glucose. Now going toward the next slide, you can see a picture over there, and that picture will explain how the transportation and the exchange of the gases took place. See, this is the expanded shape and structure of the one alveolus. You can see this is one cell, this is second, and this is third. So alveolus is not a single cell. Alveolus is being composed by a number of the type 1 and type 2 pneumocytes joined together. This is a functional unit. Okay, you can see over here, this is the nucleus of the cellular type 1 pneumocyte or alveolar cell. This is the vessel, and in which the vessel you can see the presence of the red blood cells. Okay, this is the monocyte over here that will convert into macrophage, alveolar macrophage. It is in the vessel. Now here it is in the tissue. So in tissue, the monocyte will convert into macrophage, and the function of the macrophage is to provide protection and immunity against those microorganisms that comes into the respiratory system with the dust and with the air. You can see the type 1 alveolar cells over here. This is the nucleus, this is the walls, and associated is with that is again a vessel, capillary, and here you can see the respiratory membrane. The alveolar cells, endothelial cells, and the alveolar basement membrane and capillary basement membrane and capillary endothelial cell, the whole thickness is only 0.5 micron. Here you can see type 2 alveolar cell that can secrete lecithin or surfactant that overcomes the surface tension and eases the respiratory process. This is the again further expansion of the picture. You can see the red blood cells over here. This is the expansion of that red blood cells over there. Diffusion of the oxygen from the atmospheric air into the RBCs. You can see over there. Then you have the diffusion of the carbon dioxide from the body towards the from the cells or from the RBCs towards the uh, alveolar air. So from the alveolar air, oxygen is getting diffuse in and carbon dioxide diffuse out, and this is, you can see the capillary endothelial membrane, capillary basement membrane, epithelial basement membrane, type 1, and pneumocytes also. Next diagram, respiration or gas exchange. Now you can subdivide the term respiration into four major things. One is the pulmonary ventilation or pulmonary breathing, composed of inhalation and exhalation, the exchange of the air between the atmosphere and the alveolus, exchange of the gases between atmosphere, outside environment, and alveolus. Okay, then the external or pulmonary respiration, exchange of gases between the alveolus and the blood vessels that are wrapping around the alveolus. External or pulmonary respiration, exchange of gases between the alveolus and the blood capillaries that wrapped around it. Then internal or tissue respiration, exchange of the gases between the systemic capillaries and tissue cells, systemic capillaries and tissue cells inside the body, in the systemic circulation, oxygenated blood that is being taken by the cells and the tissues. And the fourth one that is not shown over here is the cellular respiration, is the functions of the cell that take the oxygen and that take the glucose, and with the help of their combination, they actually burn that food material and create energy in the form of ATP, and as a byproduct, water vapors and carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide and water vapor soon will be exhaled out, or soon will be excreted out, or soon will be utilized in other body functions like a bicarbonate buffer system. We will discuss that later on. Now, how that process is going to accomplish the mechanics of the respiration is based on the physical laws. For example, Boyle's law, already told you so. Now again, giving you idea about that. Pressure inside the alveoli, that is intra-alveolar pressure or intra-pulmonary pressure, it must be, that is a correction, a spelling mistake, it is not lust, it is must, it must become lower than the atmospheric pressure for air to flow into lungs. So it means that the air move through the concentration gradient. So if the outside environment is 760, the internal pressure of the lungs should be decreased than the 760 mark. So 760 millimeter of mercury is the atmospheric pressure, and how it is achieved? It is achieved as we have an idea about the Boyle's law that state that the pressure of a gas in a closed container is inversely proportional to the volume. It means volume increases, pressure decreases. Volume decreases, pressure increases. Okay, it means that now what we have to do, the contraction of the respiratory muscles, or the muscle that respire, that create the inhalation process, majorly diaphragm, and secondary is the intercostal muscles, uh, external intercostal muscles. So what happened when they contract, the size of the rib cage increases, or thoracic cavity increases, along with the size increases in the lungs, and that will result in increase volume of the lungs but decrease pressure. So it is now from 760 marks, which was at rest in the lungs. Now it comes into the level of 758. So it means decrease concentration gradient is now there. So air from the atmosphere moves inside the body, and after the inhalation, when the expiration process is there, then the thoracic cavity size decreases, lungs volume decreases, so pressure increases, and increases to the mark 762 millimeter, more than the atmospheric pressure. So because of that increased pressure, now the air moves from the area of the higher concentration towards the lower concentration, and the air moves out from the lungs into the environment. So Boyle's law, we have studied inhalation, that the lungs must expand. After the expansion, increases the lung volume, decreasing the pressure below the atmospheric pressure, and the air will move in from the environment. Okay, you can see the Boyle's law with the description of that. That this is a piston, is a closed container, and it is a pressure gauge. So when the volume is 1 liter, the pressure will be 1 atmosphere. You can see over here. But when the piston is going down and the volume is become half, that is ½ liter, you will see the increase in the pressure from that 1 atmosphere toward the 2 atmosphere. So that represents how the process goes on. Then the inhalation is active, and it is because of the contraction of diaphragm majorly for the quiet breathing. Normal quiet breathing, diaphragm is very important. Okay, so it flattens and lowering down when contracted, and it is responsible for 25% of the air entering the lungs, and the rest of the 25% will be done by the external intercostal muscles. These are muscles you easily eat in the form of chops. Okay, chops, चापे जो खाते हैं, that is the intercostal muscles. So that intercostal muscles that contracts the ribs, that accounts for the 25% of the air entering lungs during the normal quiet breathing. Accessory muscles of the deep and forceful inhalations are also there. We will discuss that later on. The name of there are internal intercostal muscles, sternocleidomastoid, scaleness, and pectoralis minor. So these muscles we will continue. We will discuss later on that they are associated with forceful breathing. Forceful breathing. But with the normal quiet breathing, inhalation, diaphragm and external intercostal muscles involved. 75% of the air entering lungs because of the contraction of diaphragm. Rest is because of the contraction of internal external intercostal muscles. So when the thorax expand, parietal vessel pleura adhere tightly due to the subatmospheric pressure and surface tension pulled along with the expanding thorax. And this whole phenomena result in decrease in the intrapulmonary pressure, increase in the volume, decrease in the pressure, and the air moves in. Okay, आज हम यहीं तक रखेंगे. That's all for today. और उसके बाद in the next class we'll continue from that slide inshallah. You can ask some question if you need to. जो सवाल पूछना you can write on chat and I will try to answer. But have quick because 3 minutes are remaining for that your class. कोई सवाल अगर करना है, कुछ समझ में नहीं आया, you can ask me on the chat. ठीक है, कुछ कम टाइम रह गया तो जरा जल्दी सवाल कर ले. और अगर समझ में आ गया है तो यू कैन रिस्पॉन्ड आल्सो ऑन द चैट. हबीबा पूछती है हीमोथोरेक्स और न्यूमोथोरेक्स. प्लूरल कैविटी के अंदर अगर एयर आ जाती है, देयर इज एयर इन द प्लूरल कैविटी, तो उसमें लेबर्ड ब्रीदिंग हो जाती है, लंग्स कोलैप्स कर रहे हो, तो इट इज नोन एज न्यूमोथोरेक्स. इफ द ब्लड एंटर्स एक्सीडेंटली इनटू द प्लूरल कैविटी, तो इससे भी लंग्स की एक्सपेंशन रिट्रैक्शन मुश्किल हो जाती है, इट इज नोन एज द हीमोथोरेक्स. ठीक है, और you can consult to the book Tortora also. It also explain these terminologies and their problem. जैसे मैंने बताया गन शॉट है या स्टैबिंग है, वुंड है, उसकी वजह से हो सकता है. फिर मिशकात पूछती है प्रेजेंस ऑफ ब्लड इन द प्लूरल कैविटी इज हार्मफुल. डेफिनेटली डेफिनेटली बेटा, क्योंकि दिस फ्यू ml of the fluid is in the pleural cavity only for reducing the friction, but blood is there that can go for severe infection and collapse of the lungs. इन्फेक्शन अलग है और कोलैप्स ऑफ लंग्स अलग है. इनहेलेशन में से कर रहे हैं कि मौजम पूछते हैं बॉयल्स लॉ स्टेटेड दैट इंक्रीज वॉल्यूम डिक्रीज प्रेशर. सो जब थॉरसिक कैविटी का साइज इंक्रीज होता है, विद द इंक्रीज थॉरसिक कैविटी साइज लंग साइज इंक्रीजेस, तो लंग्स का जो प्रेशर होता है एयर का डिक्रीज हो जाता है एटमॉस्फेरिक प्रेशर से. तो बाहर एटमॉस्फेयर से एयर रश इन होती है अंदर, और एक्सहेलेशन में उल्टा काम होता है. चूंकि लंग्स वॉल्यूम साइज कम होता है तो प्रेशर बढ़ जाता है, तो प्रेशर एटमॉस्फेरिक प्रेशर से बढ़ने की वजह से फ्रॉम द लंग्स एयर विल मूव आउट फ्रॉम द बॉडी इनटू द एटमॉस्फेयर. Any more question? 1 minute left. बिल्कुल. लंग्स सर्फेक्टेंट मैंने आपको बताया, प्रीमेच्योर डिलीवरीज लंग्स आर नॉट प्रोड्यूसिंग द सर्फेक्टेंट एडिक्वेट क्वांटिटीज. सो ड्रग्स एक तो असिस्टेड वेंटिलेशन देती है, पर ड्रग्स होती हैं, स्टेरॉइड्स आर बीइंग गिवन टू इंक्रीज द सिंथेसिस ऑफ दिस सर्फेक्टेंट्स. और ऐसी जेनेटिक डिसीज भी होती है लाइक सिस्टिक फाइब्रोसिस, उसके अंदर भी लंग सेल्स जो होते हैं फाइब्रोस्ड हो जाते हैं और थिक हो जाते हैं और सर्फेक्टेंट रिड्यूस हो जाता है, तो लेबर्ड ब्रीदिंग उसकी वजह से भी होती है. ठीक है. इंट्रा पल्मोनरी प्रेशर विद इन द लंग्स जो प्रेशर होता है, जिसको इंट्रा एल्वुलर प्रेशर भी कहते हैं, ये बड़ा इंपॉर्टेंट है रिस्पायरेशन के लिए. लेकिन आगे ये रिपीट होगा बेटे, हम इसको फर्दर रिपीट करेंगे. द रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन एटमॉस्फेरिक प्रेशर, इंट्रा पल्मोनरी प्रेशर एंड जिसको हम एल्वुलर प्रेशर भी कहते हैं, एंड इंट्राप्लूरल प्रेशर. इंट्राप्लूरल प्रेशर प्लूरल फ्लूइड की वजह से प्लूरल कैविटी में भी प्रेशर डेवलप होता है इंट्राप्लूरल, उसको भी हम आगे डिस्कस करेंगे.